Hey guys, tonight we are talking about Victorian entertainment. And trust me, it was way more dangerous than binge watching Netflix at 3 in the morning. We're diving into an era when fun meant risking third degree burns, when a casual afternoon could end in the emergency ward of a grimy hospital, and when people paid good money to nearly die in the name of leisure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a muddy London park on Guy Fawkes night, 1860 something, and the air already smells like sulfur and bad decisions. Around you, families cluster in the damp grass, children shrieking with a kind of manic joy that only comes from zero parental supervision and unlimited access to explosives. Yes, explosives. Because in Victorian Britain, fireworks weren't something you watched from a safe distance while professional pyrotechnicians handled the danger. They were something you made in your kitchen using gunpowder recipes from penny magazines, then lit in public spaces while praying to whatever deity might protect fools. The rockets hiss upward, maybe. Sometimes they spiral sideways into the crowd. Sometimes they just explode at ground level, spraying sparks across the hem of someone's best Sunday dress, which ignites beautifully because it's soaked in flammable starch. You watch a Roman candle tip over, shooting colored fire directly into a gentleman's top hat, which smolders for 3 full seconds before he notices and beats it against his knee, releasing a small mushroom cloud of burnt beaver felt. The smell is unforgettable, like burning hair mixed with rotten eggs and the faint metallic tang of fear. Historians estimate that dozens died annually from firework accidents during this period, though record keeping was, shall we say, optimistic at best. Some scholars debate whether the Victorian obsession with fireworks was patriotic fervor or just a culturally acceptable death wish. Your own children, because of course you brought them, are holding sparklers, which are really just handheld magnesium torches that burn at over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Modern sparklers have safety coatings. Victorian ones did not. The 6-year-old waves his in wild circles near your face, and you can feel the heat on your cheek, see the white hot droplets of molten metal falling like tiny meteorites onto the grass where they sizzle and die. One lands on your boot. You brush it off casually because showing fear would be unmanly even as it burns a perfect little crater through the leather. Someone sets off a Catherine wheel, which is supposed to spin gracefully, on a wooden post but instead breaks free, cartwheeling through the crowd like a demented saw blade made of fire. People scatter, laughing, actually laughing because near-death experiences are hilarious when everyone's had a few glasses of gin punch. The wheel embeds itself in a tree where it spins furiously, igniting the bark, and you think, well, that's tomorrow's problem because Victorian environmental responsibility was not really a thing. The grand finale approaches. A local enthusiast, probably named Nigel, they're always named Nigel, has constructed a set piece, which is essentially a wooden frame packed with enough gunpowder to level a small shed, designed to spell out God Save the Queen in fire. Everyone gathers close, way too close, like within the blast radius close, and Nigel lights the fuse with a theatrical flourish. For 5 glorious seconds, it works. The letters ignite in sequence. G, O, D, and then something goes catastrophically wrong. The entire structure explodes simultaneously, not spelling anything, just creating a wall of flame and a sound like the sky tearing in half. You're temporarily deaf. Your eyebrows are smoking. A piece of charred wood lands at your feet, still burning merrily. And here's the thing. The absolute kicker that would make modern safety inspectors weep into their clipboards. This was considered a successful evening. Nobody died tonight, so by Victorian standards, this rates as perfectly safe family entertainment. The fact that young Tommy Jenkins will spend the next week picking splinters out of his face is just character building. Compare this to today, where we panic if someone brings sparklers to a beach bonfire without a bucket of water nearby. and you realize how much we've collectively decided that living is preferable to exciting. You walk home through streets hazed with smoke, the acrid smell clinging to your clothes, your hair, probably your lungs for the next decade, your ears ring with a persistent, high pitched whine. Tomorrow, the newspapers will report 3 house fires, a dozen burns requiring medical attention, and one unfortunate incident involving a rocket and a vicar's hat that we won't discuss in polite company. But tonight, you feel alive in that specific way that only comes from surviving something genuinely stupid. You're still riding that firework adrenaline when your cousin Edward suggests something even more Victorian in its absolute disregard for common sense. Blood sports involving rodents. Not as spectators, mind you, though you'll do plenty of that, but as participants in a world where animal cruelty isn't just legal, it's practically a cottage industry. Welcome to the realm of rat pits and ferret legging, where entertainment means watching things die or shoving live animals down your trousers for money. The rat pit is in a pub basement in Whitechapel, down steps so slick with spilled beer and other fluids you don't want to identify that you nearly tumble into the crowd already gathered around a circular wooden enclosure about 6 feet across. The smell hits you first. Wet dog, rodent musk, stale tobacco, and human sweat condensed into a fog so thick you could practically chew it. Gas lamps flicker overhead, casting shadows that make everything look like it's moving even when it isn't. This is where working class Victorians came to bet their week's wages on which terrier could kill 100 rats fastest. The rules are simple and horrifying. Someone dumps a sack of live rats, usually caught in the Thames side warehouses, fat and desperate, into the pit. A dog, typically a bull terrier or rat terrier, bred specifically for this nightmare, gets released. You watch the terrier's muscles bunch under its short coat, see the moment its prey drive kicks in, and then it's just carnage. The dog moves with surgical precision, grab, shake, drop, grab, and the rats don't stand a chance. Some try to escape by climbing the walls. Spectators knock them back down with walking sticks. The sound is what gets you. The squeaking, the wet crunch of small bones breaking. The crowd roaring their approval like this is the gladiatorial coliseum and not a dingy cellar that probably violates every building code that will ever be invented. Historians confirm that champion rat-killing dogs were celebrities in Victorian England. One famous terrier named Billy allegedly killed 100 rats in 5.5 minutes in 1825, a record that people discuss with the same reverence modern sports fans reserve for Olympic athletes. Some scholars argue this was working-class pushback against aristocratic fox hunting. If the rich could chase animals for sport, the poor would make do with what they had. Others suggest it was simply cheap entertainment in an era before television when your options were watch rats die or stare at a wall. You place a bet, 2 shillings on the brown terrier in the next match because everyone around you is betting and peer pressure is a powerful force when you're 3 beers deep and your judgment is already compromised. The next dog enters and this one's different, more frenzied, less efficient. It grabs a rat and shakes so hard its own body lifts off the ground. Blood sprays across the pit wall. Someone cheers. You feel vaguely nauseous, but also unable to look away, like watching a carriage accident happen in slow motion. But wait, there's more. Because rat baiting apparently isn't quite enough excitement for one evening. Someone mentions ferret legging, and suddenly you're learning about a rural sport so bizarre it sounds like a joke until you see grown men actually doing it. The concept: you take 2 live ferrets, carnivorous mammals with sharp teeth and territorial instincts, and you shove them down your trousers. You're belted, tied at the ankle trousers so the ferrets can't escape. Then you stand there in front of a crowd, trying not to react while the ferrets scramble around your legs, clawing at your sensitive bits, occasionally biting whatever they encounter. The current record holder, someone tells you with genuine pride, lasted 5 hours and 30 minutes. 5 hours with ferrets in his pants. The man's name was Reg Mellor, though this is actually from the 1970s because apparently some traditions refuse to die no matter how much civilization advances. But the Victorian version was just as demented. Men in Yorkshire pubs competing for bragging rights and small cash prizes, standing rigid as statues while animals with the temperament of caffeinated knife weasels explored their nether regions. You watch someone attempt it now. A farmer named Jack who's clearly made terrible life choices. The ferrets go in. His face immediately contorts into something between a grimace and a scream he's desperately trying to swallow. His left leg twitches. The crowd counts seconds, then minutes. At 3 minutes, Jack caves, ripping open his belt and releasing two very confused ferrets who scatter into the crowd, causing a brief panic that's honestly more entertaining than the main event. Compare this to modern entertainment. We lose our minds if a football player takes a hard hit. We have entire government agencies dedicated to workplace safety, and the most dangerous thing most of us do for fun is eat gas station sushi. But these Victorians, they'd stuff predators down their pants for the price of a pint and the respect of men they'd never see again. You stumble back up those slippery stairs into the relatively fresh air of a London night, which isn't actually fresh, it's coal smoke and horse manure. But after 2 hours in that basement, it smells like a mountain meadow. Your clothes reek of death and ferret. Your bet? You lost, obviously. The brown terrier got distracted and let Hatcher the Rats escape into the crowd, causing a stampede that knocked over 3 tables and someone's grandmother. The 19th century loved electricity the way modern society loves artificial intelligence, with a mixture of wonder, terror, and absolutely no idea what the long-term consequences might be. You're attending a scientific demonstration at the Royal Polytechnic Institution, which sounds educational and respectable until you realize it's basically a carnival sideshow where gentlemen in waistcoats electrocute things for entertainment. The lecturer, professor, whoever he claims to be, has promised an evening of galvanic wonders, and you paid a shilling to watch him potentially kill himself with equipment that has 0 safety features because those haven't been invented yet. The lecture hall smells like ozone and burned hair, which should be your first warning, mixed with a perpetual Victorian background scent of unwashed bodies and coal dust. The professor stands beside a massive apparatus of glass tubes, copper wires, zinc plates submerged in acid baths, and what appears to be a hand crank operated by a nervous assistant who looks like he's reconsidering his career choices. This is a voltaic pile, one of the first batteries capable of generating enough current to make your muscles convulse involuntarily or stop your heart, whichever comes first. The demonstration begins innocently enough. Professor lights a small arc lamp, creating a brilliance that makes everyone squint and murmur appreciatively because electric light is still novel enough to seem like captured lightning, which technically it is. Then he escalates. He produces a dead frog. Where did he get a dead frog, you wonder? Did he bring it from home in his pocket? And attaches copper wires to its legs. The assistant cranks the generator. Current flows, and the frog's legs kick. Not a little twitch. A full, vigorous kick, like the frog is trying to hop away from its own corpse. The crowd gasps. Someone faints in the back row, though whether from the sight or the terrible ventilation is unclear. The professor, sensing he has his audience hooked, launches into an explanation of Luigi Galvani's experiments from 1780, how electrical current can stimulate muscle tissue, how this proves that animal bodies run on some kind of biological electricity. He doesn't mention that Galvani originally thought he discovered animal electricity as a unique life force, a theory we now know is wrong. But in this gaslit lecture hall, watching dead legs dance, it feels like magic. Historians confirm these demonstrations were wildly popular entertainment across Europe and America. Giovanni Aldini, Galvani's nephew, took the show on the road, famously electrifying the corpse of executed murderer George Foster in London in 1803, making the body's jaw quiver and fist clench, causing one spectator to literally die of fright. Some scholars debate whether these spectacles advance scientific understanding or just traumatize a generation with corpse puppetry. The answer is probably both, but the professor isn't done. He needs volunteers. Your hand stays firmly at your side, but the gentleman next to you, let's call him Eager Timothy, shoots up like a schoolboy who knows the answer. Timothy is invited to the stage where he's instructed to hold 2 brass handles connected to the voltaic pile. The assistant cranks slowly at first. Timothy smiles nervously. The professor increases the current. Timothy's smile becomes fixed, then strained. His arms begin to shake, not from fear but from involuntary muscle contractions. He tries to let go of the handles but can't. His hands have clenched around them, locked by the very electricity flowing through them, and you're watching a man literally unable to release the thing that's hurting him. The professor, sensing this has gone from entertaining to concerning, signals the assistant to stop. Timothy staggers back to his seat, his hair somehow standing slightly more upright than before, his hands trembling. He laughs it off because admitting you're terrified in front of 100 strangers isn't the Victorian way, but you notice he doesn't volunteer for anything else that evening. Now comes the grand finale. The professor produces what he calls his electric kiss apparatus, which is exactly as weird as it sounds. Two audience members, preferably of opposite sexes because Victorians love their heteronormative spectacle, stand on insulated platforms. One holds the electrical contact. They lean in for a kiss. At the moment their lips touch, completing the circuit, both receive a shock that makes them jerk apart like repelling magnets. The crowd howls with laughter. Romance, Victorian style, electrified, public, and mildly dangerous. Compare this to today's science demonstrations, which involve rubber gloves, safety goggles, and liability waivers thicker than textbooks. We've collectively decided that education shouldn't require medical treatment afterward, but Victorians, they wanted their knowledge delivered with a side of potential electrocution, wanted to feel the power of science in their convulsing muscles, wanted to walk away with stories about the time they almost died learning about voltage. You file out with the crowd, your ears ringing from the electrical crackling and the professor's booming narration. Your friend Timothy is still flexing his hands, trying to work feeling back into his fingers. Someone behind you debates whether electricity might be the secret to reanimating the dead, whether Frankenstein wasn't fiction, but prophecy. The night air feels different somehow, charged with possibility and the faint smell of ozone clinging to your coat. Tomorrow, the newspapers will report that a lecturer in Manchester actually did kill a volunteer during a similar demonstration, stopping their heart with too much current. But that news won't reach you for days, and besides, you survived tonight, which means it was worth it. The penny farthing bicycle looks like something designed by a committee that included exactly one engineer and several people who genuinely hated that engineer. You're standing outside a cycling club in 1879, staring up at a machine that defies every principle of physics you thought you understood. The front wheel towers nearly 5 feet high, taller than most women, taller than many men, while the rear wheel is comically small, like someone attached a dinner plate as an afterthought. There's no chain, no gears, no brakes worth mentioning, just a leather saddle perched at a height, where falling means you have time to contemplate your life choices before hitting the ground face first. Your friend Charles, who has more enthusiasm than self-preservation instinct, insists this is the future of transportation. He's already mounted his penny farthing, a process that involved running alongside it, placing one foot on a peg near the rear axle, building momentum, then somehow hoisting himself up onto that elevated saddle like mounting a very unstable horse that's permanently rearing. He wobbles for a terrifying moment, arms windmilling, then stabilizes and pedals off down the tree-lined path, looking absurdly pleased with himself from his position roughly 8 feet above the earth. Now it's your turn. The instructor, a wiry man with multiple visible scars that should really be a warning, explains the mounting process as if it's perfectly reasonable. Run, step, push, swing, sit, simple. Except the bicycle is already tipping, always tipping, wants to fall over like a drunk giraffe even when stationary. You grip the handlebars, which are positioned somewhere near your chest when you're standing, take 3 running steps, hit the mounting peg, and immediately understand why this contraption earned the nickname the Widow Maker. Your weight shifts too far forward. The front wheel veers left. You're simultaneously climbing and steering and praying, your legs swinging wildly as you try to find the saddle that's bucking like a rodeo bull. For one glorious second, you're seated. You're balanced, you're actually doing it. And then a small pebble, maybe half an inch across, appears in your path. The massive front wheel hits it. Physics takes over. The wheel stops. You don't. This is called taking a header, and it's the single most common way to die on a penny farthing. Your momentum carries you forward and down, your body pivoting over the handlebars in a slow motion arc that gives you plenty of time to see the gravel path rushing up to meet your face. You throw your hands out, they're going to hit first, then your wrists will bend at an angle wrists weren't designed for, then your forearms, elbows, shoulders, and finally your head will bounce off the ground like a badly thrown ball. You hit. The impact rattles your teeth, drives the breath from your lungs, grinds gravel into your palms through your gloves, your top hat, because you're wearing a top hat. This is 1879. Rolls away like it's abandoning ship. The bicycle clatters down beside you, front wheel still spinning lazily, mocking your failure. The instructor jogs over, completely unsurprised, and offers you a hand up with the cheerful comment that everyone takes a few headers while learning. Historians document that penny farthing accidents filled Victorian hospital wards with broken collarbones, fractured wrists, and severe head injuries. The high center of gravity meant any sudden stop sent riders catapulting forward, often landing on their heads from heights of 6 or 7 feet. Some scholars debate whether the penny farthing's brief popularity represents Victorian innovation or Victorian stupidity. The design was obsolete almost as soon as the safety bicycle with equal-sized wheels appeared, yet men kept riding these death traps for years out of pride. Compare this to modern cycling, where helmets are mandatory, bikes have multiple brakes, and the seat sits maybe 3 feet off the ground. We've engineered danger out of the equation as much as possible. But Victorians, they engineered danger in, made it a feature, bragged about their scars at dinner parties like war veterans comparing wounds. You remount because giving up means admitting defeat in front of Charles, who's circling back now, still somehow upright, grinning like an idiot. This time, you make it 50 yards before a dog runs across your path. You swerve. The front wheel catches, you're airborne again, but this time you manage to twist mid-flight, landing on your shoulder instead of your face, which feels like a victory, even though you've definitely dislocated something. By the end of the afternoon, you've successfully ridden a penny farthing for approximately 300 yards total, taken 5 headers, acquired bruises that will confuse you for weeks every time you discover a new one, and developed a genuine understanding of why this ridiculous machine will be extinct within a generation. The leather saddle has abraded your inner thighs raw. Your hands are scraped bloody. Your pride is a distant memory. But Charles is already talking about joining a cycling club, about racing next month, about touring the countryside on these towering death machines. You smile and nod because friendship sometimes means supporting terrible decisions. And besides, watching Charles inevitably face-plant at speed will probably be worth the price of admission. Winter arrives in Victorian England like a punishment, turning the Thames into something between a river and a skating rink, and suddenly everyone decides this is the perfect time to strap blades to their feet and trust medieval, ice-freezing patterns with their lives. You're standing on the bank of a frozen pond in Hyde Park, watching dozens of people glide and stumble across a surface that creaks ominously every few minutes, and you're wondering if this is recreation or a mass suicide pact with extra steps. The skates themselves are terrifying artifacts. No modern boot and blade integration here. These are iron blades that you strap to your regular shoes using leather cords and buckles, creating a wobbly, unstable platform that guarantees at least one ankle injury per outing. The blades aren't even properly sharpened half of the time. They're dull, rusty things that catch on rough ice patches and send you sprawling. You tighten the straps on your own pair, borrowed from your brother, who swears they are perfectly safe in that tone people use when they're lying but want to believe they're not. Your first step onto the ice is a revelation in humiliation. Your legs immediately try to split in opposite directions, like you're attempting an involuntary performance of the splits. Your arms pinwheel frantically. A child, maybe 8 years old, gliding backward, looks at you with undisguised pity. You manage to right yourself, shuffle forward a few inches, and then your left skate catches a ridge in the ice and you go down hard on your tailbone. The impact sends a shockwave up your spine that you feel in your teeth. The ice itself is a nightmare of inconsistency. Near the edges, where it's thinner, you can see water pooling on top. black, frigid water that soaks through your boots if you venture too close. Someone has helpfully placed warning signs. Danger, thin ice, which dozens of people are cheerfully ignoring because Victorian risk assessment is essentially non existent. You watch a portly gentleman skate directly over a section marked with red flags. Hear the ice groan beneath him, see hairline cracks spread like spiderwebs, and he just keeps going, oblivious or suicidal. Historians confirm that frost fairs on the frozen Thames were legendary events during particularly cold winters, the most famous in 1684 lasting 2 months. Entire markets sprang up on the ice, food stalls, puppet shows, even a printing press churning out commemorative certificates. But these fairs also claimed lives regularly. People would skate over thin patches and plunge through into water so cold it stopped your heart in minutes. Some scholars debate whether the Little Ice Age made these fairs possible, or whether Londoners were just desperate enough for entertainment to risk death on questionable ice. You venture towards the center of the pond, where the ice is supposedly thickest, moving in an awkward shuffle slide that resembles skating the way a seizure resembles dancing. A woman in enormous skirts glides past, somehow graceful, despite wearing approximately 40 pounds of fabric that could drag her straight to the bottom if she broke through. She makes it look easy, her blades carving elegant curves in the ice, while you're leaving scratch marks that look like a drunk chicken tried to write its memoirs. The cold is penetrating, the kind that ignores your wool coat and goes straight for your bones. Your fingers are numb inside your gloves. Your nose has lost all feeling. Every breath creates a small cloud of frost that hangs in the air for a moment before dissipating, and you realize you're essentially breathing visible proof of how badly you're suffering for fun. Then you hear it, a crack. Not the gentle creak of settling ice, but a sharp, definitive crack like a gunshot. Everyone stops moving. In that frozen moment, you see a dark line appear in the ice about 30 yards away, racing across the surface like someone's drawing it with invisible ink. A woman screams. The portly gentleman from earlier has gone through up to his waist, his face transforming from confidence to terror in half a second as the black water claims him. Men skate toward him, skating toward danger, because Victorian masculinity demands you risk your life to save someone else's, grabbing his arms and hauling him back onto solid ice. He emerges like a drowned rat, his lower half completely soaked, water already freezing into icicles on his trousers. He'll be lucky if he doesn't lose toes to frostbite. He'll be luckier still if he doesn't catch pneumonia and die within the week, which is exactly what happened to hundreds of people during these winters. You decide you've had enough character building for one day. Getting off the ice is harder than getting on. Your ankles are screaming, your muscles have cramped from the constant tension of trying not to fall, and you're pretty sure you pulled something in your groin that will hurt for days. You stumble back to the bank, collapse on a bench, and spend 10 minutes fumbling with frozen fingers to unbuckle these medieval torture devices from your feet. Compare this to modern ice skating, where we resurface the ice with machines, require helmets for children, have rescue equipment stationed nearby, and generally treat frozen water with appropriate respect. But Victorians looked at knife-thin ice over bone-breaking depths and thought, yes, let's tie knives to our feet and see what happens. And then they wondered why winter had such high mortality rates. Summer arrives, which means Victorians have decided drowning should be a beach activity rather than just a winter sport. You're at Brighton, standing on a pebble beach that's less romantic seaside and more walking on ball bearings, staring at the ocean while wearing a bathing costume that weighs approximately 30 pounds dry and will weigh 60 once wet. This isn't swimwear. It's a wool suit designed by someone who fundamentally misunderstood the concept of buoyancy. The men's bathing costume covers you from neck to knees, long sleeves, full pants, all wool, all incredibly absorbent. It's like wearing a wearable sponge designed to pull you underwater. The women have it worse, naturally, because Victorian society demanded modesty even while drowning. Their bathing dresses include full skirts, bloomers underneath, stockings, bathing shoes, and sometimes a decorative hat that served no purpose except to make rescue attempts more complicated. You watch one woman wade into the surf, her skirts immediately billowing up around her like a wet parachute, and you realize this is how Victorian beach days ended in tragedy. The changing process itself is a production. You're not allowed to simply walk from your hotel in your bathing costume. That would be scandalous, showing everyone your wool covered knees. Instead, you enter a bathing machine, which is essentially a wooden shed on wheels that horses pull into the water. You change inside this claustrophobic box while it bounces over the rocky beach, trying not to fall over as you strip down and pull on the damp, salt stiffened bathing suit that smells like mildew, and despair from the last person who used it. The horse pulls your wooden prison into the surf until water laps at the bottom step. You emerge from the back door, theoretically shielded from prying eyes on the beach, and immediately step into water cold enough to make your lungs seize. The English Channel in summer is approximately 58 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that hypothermia is a genuine risk after 20 minutes. But Victorians don't really understand hypothermia yet. They just know that sometimes people go numb and stop moving and have to be fished out. You wade deeper, feeling the rocks shift under your feet, feeling your bathing costume absorb water with every step until it clings to your body like a second skin made of lead. Modern swimsuits are designed to reduce drag. Victorian ones are designed to increase drowning efficiency. The fabric gets heavier, pulls downward, restricts your movement. Swimming, actual swimming, becomes nearly impossible. You manage a sort of vertical dog paddle that keeps your head above water but propels you nowhere. Historians document that seaside resorts were enormously popular among Victorian middle classes who believed sea bathing had medicinal properties. Doctors prescribed taking the waters for everything from melancholy to tuberculosis, despite zero evidence it did. Anything except make you cold and salty. Some scholars debate whether the bathing machine was about modesty or class segregation, keeping the riffraff from ogling their betters in wet wool. Either way, the machines were absurd, expensive, and created an entire industry of machine operators who spent their days coaxing horses into the surf. A wave hits you, not even a large wave, just a normal ocean swell, and suddenly you're underwater. The wool has absorbed so much water that you're negatively buoyant, actually sinking instead of floating. You kick frantically, your bathing costume tangling around your legs like seaweed. Pull yourself upward, break the surface, gasping and sputtering. Salt water burns your nose and throat. Your eyes sting. Another wave approaches. This is when you understand why Victorian beaches employed dippers, burly women whose job was to grab nervous bathers and physically dunk them underwater, supposedly for health benefits, but actually because people were paying money and expected to suffer for it. You watch one dipper manhandle a shrieking lady, plunging her beneath the surface 3 times like some kind of aggressive baptism, then haul her up and march her back toward the beach, where she'll collapse in her bathing machine and possibly reconsider her life choices. You attempt to swim parallel to shore, manage about 10 strokes before your arms feel like concrete and your lungs are burning from the effort of moving through water while wearing a portable anchor. A child floats past you on his back, somehow managing to keep his nose above water despite his equally ridiculous costume, and you feel a flash of envy for the casual competence of youth. Compare this to modern beach days. Nylon swimsuits that weigh ounces, lifeguards with actual training, understanding of riptides and undertow, readily available flotation devices. We've removed drowning from the list of likely beach outcomes, but Victorians saw the ocean as another thing to conquer through sheer stubbornness and inappropriate clothing. Another way to prove their moral superiority by suffering through recreational activities. You drag yourself back toward the bathing machine, legs trembling from effort and cold. Your bathing costume now weighing more than you do. Water streams from the wool, leaving puddles on the wooden steps. Inside the machine, you peel off the sodden fabric, a process that takes actual strength, like removing a second skin, and stand there shivering, covered in goosebumps, teeth chattering, while the horse pulls you back toward the beach where you can pretend this was fun. The pub is less a building and more a concentrated essence of poor decisions distilled into architecture. You push through the door on a Friday night, and the atmosphere hits you like a physical thing. Tobacco smoke so thick you could carve it into blocks. The yeasty smell of spilled beer soaking into floorboards that probably haven't been cleaned since the reign of George III, and the overwhelming musk of unwashed bodies packed into insufficient space with inadequate ventilation. The gaslights flicker, casting shadows that make everyone look vaguely criminal, which is appropriate because several people here probably are. This is the red line in Southwark, though it could be any of 10,000 similar establishments across England where working class men come to forget they have jobs to return to on Monday. The noise is tremendous, conversations shouted over other conversations, someone banging out a tune on a battered piano in the corner, glass breaking somewhere near the back. Laughter that sounds more aggressive than joyful. You squeeze toward the bar, trying not to jostle anyone because jostling can lead to arguments. Arguments lead to fights, and fights lead to you explaining to your wife why you came home with fewer teeth than you left with. The beer arrives in a tankard that's theoretically been washed, but definitely hasn't. The liquid inside is room temperature, slightly cloudy, and tastes like someone fermented disappointment. This is before refrigeration, before quality control, before anyone understood that bacteria exist. You drink it anyway because everyone else is drinking theirs, and because the alternative is the gin, which is probably partially made from industrial solvent and will definitely blind you if you're unlucky. Someone starts a game of darts in the corner. Actual darts, heavy metal tipped projectiles being hurled across a crowded room by men who've had 6 pints and questionable hand-eye coordination even when sober. You watch one. Dart missed the board entirely, sail past 3 bystanders, and embed itself in the wooden post near your head with a solid thunk. The thrower shrugs apologetically but doesn't stop playing. Historians confirm that pub dart injuries were common enough that some establishments banned the game, though enforcement was approximately 0% effective because telling drunk Victorians they can't throw sharp objects is like telling the tide not to come in. The entertainment escalates. Someone challenges someone else to an arm wrestling match. Money appears on tables, shillings and pennies wagered by men who probably need that money for rent. The contestants lock hands, veins bulging, faces reddening with effort, while the crowd roars encouragement and insults in equal measure. The table they're using wobbles dangerously. Someone's elbow knocks over 3 drinks. Nobody cares. This is peak Victorian pub culture. Aggressive, loud, perpetually on the edge of violence, but rarely quite. Tipping over. Then the singing starts. Not organized singing, not a choir, but spontaneous bellowing of music hall songs, bawdy ballads, and patriotic anthems that everyone knows 3 words of but sings anyway at full volume. The man next to you is attempting Champagne Charlie, getting the chorus completely wrong, spraying beer-scented saliva with every enthusiastic phrase. The smell of his breath could strip paint. You join in because not joining in marks you as an outsider, and outsiders get targeted. A fight breaks out near the fireplace. Inevitable? Really? You've been waiting for it. 2 dockers arguing over something trivial, maybe a spilled drink, maybe a perceived insult, maybe nothing at all because alcohol and masculine pride are a volatile combination. They're grappling now, knocking over chairs, patrons scattering to give them space while simultaneously forming a circle to watch. The bartender doesn't intervene. The bartender never intervenes unless someone's actively dying. And even then, it's questionable. One fighter gets the other in a headlock. They crash into the piano, producing a discordant crash of keys. The pianist keeps playing, apparently accustomed to his instrument being used as a weapon. Someone throws a punch that misses its target and hits an innocent bystander, who immediately joins the fight because that's just what you do. It's spreading now, becoming a general brawl, and you're pressed against the wall trying to stay out of it while also maintaining your drink because you paid for that beer and you're going to finish it even if the pub collapses. Some scholars debate whether Victorian pubs were dangerous or just rowdy, whether the violence was real or performative. The answer is both. Most nights ended with bruises and broken furniture rather than deaths, but deaths absolutely happen. Stabbings and arguments over gambling debts, beatings that went too far. Alcohol poisoning from adulterated drinks. compare this to modern bars with security guards, last call laws, surveillance cameras, and the constant threat of litigation keeping everything relatively civil. The fight eventually exhausts itself. The combatants separate, breathing hard, bleeding from various locations. And then, in the most Victorian twist, they shake hands and buy each other drinks. Honor satisfied, grudge forgotten, at least until next Friday. You finish your terrible beer, navigate through the debris field of overturned furniture and broken glass, and stumble back into the night air which tastes like freedom despite being mostly coal smoke and horse manure. Your ears ring from the noise. Your clothes reek of tobacco and spilled alcohol. You've witnessed at least 3 activities that would get a modern establishment shut down by health inspectors and somehow survived another traditional English night out. The music hall is what happens when you take the pub, add a stage, remove approximately 30% of the already minimal safety standards, and charge admission. You're at the Canterbury Music Hall in Lambeth, packed into a seat that's less a chair and more a wooden suggestion, surrounded by 500 people who've come to watch variety acts that range from genuinely talented to why is this person on stage and how do we make them stop. The air is somehow worse than the pub. Same tobacco smoke, same unwashed humanity, but now condensed and heated by gaslight and body warmth until it's practically soup. You can taste it on your tongue, feel it coating your throat. The ceiling is low, decorated with peeling gilt paint and questionable cherubs, and you're reasonably certain the whole structure is a fire hazard waiting for its moment of destiny. The exits are inadequate, the aisles packed with standing room patrons, and if panic started, you'd be trampled within seconds. This thought occurs to many people simultaneously, but everyone stays because the alternative is admitting you're afraid, and Victorian masculinity doesn't allow for that. The chairman, a portly fellow with magnificent sideburns, bangs his gavel on a table at the side of the stage and announces the first act. It's a singer, a woman in a dress cut slightly lower than a respectable society would approve, which is exactly why she's here instead of at the opera house. She launches into a ballad about a sailor and his sweetheart, hitting notes that are mostly correct, and the audience immediately starts heckling. Not quietly, not subtly, full-throated shouts about her appearance, her pitch, her life choices. She ignores them like a professional, but you can see the tightness around her eyes. Then come the comic singers, performing songs with titles like The Ratcatcher's Daughter and Villikins and His Dinah, which sound wholesome until you realize every verse is loaded with innuendo that would make a modern comedian blush. The lyrics are ostensibly about innocent subjects, courtship, work, daily life, but delivered with winks and meaningful pauses that make it clear we're talking about something else entirely. The crowd roars approval at the particularly risque bits, and you laugh along because everyone's laughing, swept up in the collective suspension of propriety. Historians document that music halls were simultaneously wildly popular and morally suspect throughout Victorian society. The middle classes attended while publicly disapproving, creating a thriving culture of hypocrisy. Local authorities constantly tried to regulate content, impose curfews, and shut down establishments deemed too bawdy. Some scholars debate whether music halls were working class resistance to bourgeois morality or just capitalism discovering that sex sells, even when you can't explicitly mention sex. Between acts, you notice the police in the back, plainclothes officers taking notes, monitoring for content that crosses from suggestive into actually illegal. The performers know they're there. Everyone knows they're there. It's a delicate dance where comedians push boundaries, authorities pretend to maintain standards, and somehow the whole system functions through mutual pretense. One comic comes dangerously close to the line with a joke about the Queen's late husband, catches himself, pivots to a safer target, and the tension releases in laughter. The acrobats arrive, a family troupe performing on equipment that hasn't been inspected by anyone with engineering credentials. They swing from trapezes attached to ceiling beams you can see flexing under the weight. They build human pyramids on a stage floor that audibly creaks. A young girl, maybe 12, does a backflip from her father's shoulders, lands perfectly, and you realize you've been holding your breath. One mistake and she's dead or paralyzed, and the show would just continue after they dragged her off. Because the alternative is refunding tickets. The noise level is extraordinary. People aren't just watching, they're eating, drinking, arguing, conducting business deals, propositioning each other, living entire social lives while acts perform desperately for attention. Waiters circulate with trays of drinks, navigating through the crowd like salmon swimming upstream, occasionally dumping beer on patrons who don't move fast enough. The smell of fried food mingles with everything else. Someone's selling pies from a basket, mysterious meat and pastry that could be anything from beef to cat. And people are buying them because hunger and judgment are inversely correlated. A comedian takes the stage, immediately launches into material about politicians, foreigners, his wife, and bodily functions. The four pillars of Victorian comedy. Some jokes land, some die, but he keeps going with the manic energy of someone who knows the crowd will turn on him if he shows weakness. He does an impression of the prime minister that's borderline treasonous. People love it. The police officers in the back write faster. Then the lightning sketches, artist appears. A man who draws portraits in charcoal while blindfolded, or at least claiming to be blindfolded, producing recognizable caricatures of audience members in under a minute. It's either genuine talent or an elaborate trick involving peeking, but it's entertaining either way. He draws the chairman, exaggerating the sideburns to ridiculous proportions, and the chairman laughs like it's the finest compliment he's ever received. Compare this to modern entertainment. Comedy clubs with drink minimums, Netflix specials you watch alone on your couch, concerts with assigned seating and security guards. We've sanitized and individualized everything. Remove the chaos and the collective experience. But music halls were alive in a way that's hard to explain to people who've only experienced algorithmically recommended content. Dangerous, yes. Inappropriate, absolutely. But electric with possibility and human messiness. You leave at midnight, ears ringing from the noise, throat raw from shouting along with songs you didn't know you knew, morally compromised but thoroughly entertained. Tomorrow you'll pretend you spent the evening somewhere respectable. Tonight, you're just grateful you made it out before the inevitable fire. The church hall has been transformed into what the organizing committee calls a grand charity bazaar, which translates roughly to middle-class housewives engaged in passive-aggressive economic warfare disguised as Christian charity. You've been volunteered, not asked, volunteered by your wife to attend this afternoon spectacle where the goal is ostensibly raising money for orphans, but actually establishing social dominance through the medium of overpriced doilies and aggressive cake sales. The hall smells like potpourri, furniture polish, and barely suppressed competition. Long tables line the walls, each one draped in white cloth and decorated with hand-lettered signs announcing their offerings. Fine needlework, baked goods, preserves and jellies, white elephant items, which is Victorian code for junk we found in our attics and are trying to convince you is treasure. Behind each table stand a woman in her best day dress, smiling with all her teeth while her eyes calculate which other tables are attracting more customers and how this reflects on her social standing. Mrs. Henderson runs the needlework table like a military operation. She spent 6 months embroidering a tablecloth with a pattern of roses so intricate it probably damaged her eyesight. And she's selling it for 3 guineas, approximately a week's wages for a working man, while explaining to anyone who'll listen that the stitching technique is French and very difficult. And really, she should charge more, but it's for charity. Across the room, Mrs. Peterson at the baked goods table is loudly discussing how her lemon cake uses real lemons imported from Italy, not that cheap domestic citrus, while glancing meaningfully at Mrs. Henderson's table. The war has begun. You're stationed at the gentleman's diversion table, which is euphemism for the dumping ground of items nobody else wanted. Cigar boxes carved by enthusiastic amateurs, leather bookmarks that look like they were made by someone who'd never seen a book, hand-whittled letter openers that couldn't cut butter. Your job is to look interested while potential customers browse, pretending these objects have value beyond occupying space. A portly gentleman picks up a wooden pipe carved to look like a fish, examines it with theatrical seriousness, puts it down, and moves on. This happens approximately every 5 minutes. Historians confirm that charity bazaars were major social events in Victorian communities, raising substantial funds for hospitals, orphanages, and missionary work. But they were also battlegrounds for status competition where the quality of your contributions reflected directly on your family's position. Some scholars debate whether these events empowered middle class women by giving them organizational roles or just channeled their energies into socially acceptable warfare. The answer, as usual, is both. Empowerment through combat. The raffle drawing approaches, which is another level. Of social complexity entirely. People have bought numbered tickets throughout the day, hoping to win prizes donated by local merchants and wealthy patrons. The grand prize is a porcelain tea set, hand-painted with pastoral scenes, donated by Lady Worthington, who couldn't attend but sent her housekeeper to make sure everyone knows about her generosity. The second prize is a ham. The contrast between these two items, delicate porcelain versus a preserved pig leg, perfectly encapsulates Victorian class dynamics. Mrs. Henderson's daughter draws the winning ticket. Number 47. A moment of suspense. Then Mrs. Peterson's son produces his ticket, number 47, and claims the tea set. Mrs. Henderson's face goes through a remarkable journey of emotions: surprise, disappointment, suspicion, and finally, tight-lipped congratulation. You can practically see her mentally calculating whether this was legitimate or somehow rigged, whether the Petersons bribed someone, whether she needs to escalate this conflict into open social warfare. The baked goods competition reaches its crisis point around 3 o'clock. Someone's Victoria sponge has collapsed, possibly sabotaged, definitely blamed on sabotage, leaving a sad, deflated disc of cake on a decorative plate. Accusations fly in whispered tones. Mrs. Wilson's fruit tart was positioned too close to the window in direct sunlight, which everyone knows will melt the glaze. And did Mrs. Thompson place it there deliberately? Mrs. Thompson's expression suggests she absolutely did, and she's proud of it. Children run through the hall, bored and understimulated, occasionally crashing into tables and threatening to topple carefully arranged displays. Nobody's actually supervising them because the mothers are too busy with their commercial warfare, so they just careen around like small, well-dressed missiles until someone's son knocks over the preserves table, sending jars of strawberry jam cascading onto the floor, where they explode in red, sticky detonations that look disturbingly like crime scenes. The cleanup operation requires 3 women and 20 minutes of scrubbing, during which all other business halts and everyone stands around offering unhelpful suggestions while secretly delighted that something dramatic has happened. The boy is scolded, his mother mortified, and Mrs. Henderson makes a comment about proper supervision that lands like a knife despite being delivered in the sweetest possible tone. Compare this to modern charity events. Online fundraisers where you click a button and never see another human. Corporate charity galas with professional planners and tax deductions. School bake sales with store-bought cookies because nobody has time for homemade anymore. We've removed the personal stakes, the social combat, the visceral experience of community competition. Safer, certainly. More efficient, probably. But missing that particular Victorian energy where everything mattered. Too much and everyone was keeping score. By 5 o'clock, you've sold exactly 2 items. A leather bookmark and a cigar box, both to the same man who clearly pitied you. Your feet ache from standing. Your face hurts from maintaining polite interest. The hall has raised 47 pounds for the orphans, which is actually quite good, though nobody will remember that. They'll remember that Mrs. Peterson won the tea set and Mrs. Henderson's tablecloth didn't sell, and this will be discussed in parlors across town for weeks. You escape into the evening air, free at last, wondering why humans voluntarily subject themselves to these rituals, knowing you'll be back next year because refusing would be social suicide. You're standing in the rain, actual, sustained, miserable English rain that soaks through wool like it has a personal vendetta against dryness. Watching a brass band parade march through the high street. This isn't optional attendance. The parade is for the Queen's Jubilee, or maybe a local regiment returning from somewhere imperial, or possibly just because it's Tuesday and Victorians believe that suffering builds character. Either way, you're here. You're wet, and you're about to experience acoustic torture disguised as patriotic celebration. The band appears around the corner like a musical apocalypse. 20 men in military uniforms that probably fit correctly when they were issued 5 years ago, but now strain at the seams or hang loose depending on each man's personal relationship with beer and pies. They're carrying instruments, tubas, trombones, cornets, drums, all brass, all capable of producing sound at volumes that would violate modern noise ordinances by substantial margins. The drum major leads them, twirling a staff with more enthusiasm than skill, occasionally almost dropping it, catching it at the last second in moves that look impressive until you realize he's just barely preventing disaster. The first notes hit you like a physical wall. It's supposed to be God Save the Queen, but what emerges is a cacophony where everyone's playing the same song at slightly different tempos and in keys that are theoretically related but practically incompatible. The tuba player is half a beat behind everyone else. One cornet is sharp enough to curdle milk. The drums are enthusiastic but uncoordinated, creating rhythm that suggests multiple time signatures fighting for dominance. This is what music sounds like when played by people with passion but without enough practice, and it's being amplified by the architecture. The stone buildings on either side of the street creating an echo chamber that bounces the sound back and forth until it's impossible to tell where the band ends and the reverb begins. Your ears are ringing already, and they haven't even reached your position yet. The crowd around you is clapping and cheering, either genuinely moved by this display of civic pride or engaging in collective delusion. Small children are crying, not from emotion, from actual pain. They're developing eardrums, struggling with decibel levels that wouldn't be out of place at a modern rock concert. Parents ignore the tears because teaching children to endure unpleasant experiences for the sake of tradition is basically Victorian parenting in a nutshell. Historians document that brass bands were enormously popular in Victorian Britain, with nearly every town, factory, and institution forming their own ensembles. They performed at public events, competitions, and celebrations, bringing music to the working classes who couldn't afford concert halls. Some scholars debate whether these bands represented genuine musical culture or just noise pollution. With patriotic justification, the answer varies depending on the band's competence, which ranged from surprisingly good to please make it stop. The rain intensifies. Water pours off the drum major's hat in a steady stream. The brass instruments are accumulating rainwater inside, which the players occasionally stop to empty by pointing their horns downward and letting sheets of water cascade onto the street. This does nothing to improve the sound quality. If anything, it makes the instruments sound waterlogged, which is exactly what they are. The musicians' fingers slip on wet valves. Sheet music disintegrates into pulp, but they keep playing because stopping would be admitting defeat, and British stubbornness is stronger than logic or comfort. You're now thoroughly soaked. Your hat has given up any pretense of being waterproof and is basically just channeling rain down the back of your neck in a steady, cold stream. Your boots squelch with every step. The woman next to you has opened an umbrella, which immediately turns inside out in the wind, creating a brief moment of slapstick comedy before she abandons it to its fate and just accepts wetness as the natural state of existence. The band launches into a march, something military and aggressive that's probably famous, but you can't identify it because every note is blurred by rain and incompetence into a sort of brass-flavored noise soup. They're marching in formation or attempting to. The front row stays relatively straight while the back rows drift like ships without anchors, creating a formation that resembles a letter V more than a rectangle. One trombone player nearly pokes out the eye of the man in front of him with his slide. Nobody breaks character. Compare this to modern parades, amplified sound systems, professional musicians, weather contingency plans, permits that get canceled if conditions are dangerous. We've decided that entertainment shouldn't require enduring hypothermia and hearing damage. But Victorians, they'd march a brass band through a hurricane if it was on the schedule, and everyone would stand there watching, slowly developing pneumonia, calling it a lovely display of community spirit. The parade continues past you, the sound gradually fading as they march toward the next street, leaving behind only ringing ears and muddy footprints. The crowd begins to disperse, everyone pretending this was worth attending, that their afternoon wasn't just wasted standing in rain listening to amateur musicians assault their senses. You'll all go home, change into dry clothes if you own any, and probably develop a cough that lingers for weeks because wet wool and Victorian hygiene are a dangerous combination. Your feet are numb, your fingers have lost color and feeling. You can't hear properly, just a persistent tone like someone left a tea kettle whistling inside your skull. But you stayed for the whole parade because leaving early would suggest weakness, and Victorian, social pressure is stronger than self-preservation. Tomorrow, someone will ask if you attended. You'll say, yes, it was wonderful, very moving. They'll agree, everyone will lie, and next year, you'll do it again. The village hall has been converted into a temporary theater, which means someone hung curtains on a rope across one end of the room and hoped for the best. You're here for the Amateur Dramatic Society's production of Macbeth. Actual Macbeth, Shakespeare's Scottish tragedy performed by people whose primary qualifications are enthusiasm and proximity to the hall when volunteers were needed. This will either be unintentionally hilarious or dangerously close to an actual tragedy, and you've placed internal bets on both. The seating is wooden chairs arranged in uneven rows, no aisle markings, no consideration for sightlines. You're in the third row, behind a man wearing a hat the size of a cartwheel, who absolutely refuses to remove it despite pointed coughs from everyone behind him. The stage is approximately 8 feet deep, lit by oil lamps and candles arranged along the front edge, creating dramatic shadows but also a genuine fire hazard that nobody has addressed, because fire safety won't be invented for another few decades. The curtain opens, gets stuck halfway, someone reaches around to yank it the rest of the way, revealing the cast frozen in their opening positions, pretending they haven't noticed the technical difficulty. Macbeth stands center stage, wearing what is clearly someone's military uniform from the Crimean War with a plaid blanket pinned to it as a kilt. Lady Macbeth wears her Sunday best with a crown made of painted cardboard that sits at a jaunty angle, suggesting either artistic choice or inadequate pinning. The witches are 3 village women who've applied charcoal to their faces in an interpretation of looking spooky that makes them resemble chimney sweeps more than supernatural beings. Macbeth begins his first speech. He's forgotten his lines, completely forgotten them. He stands there, mouth opening and closing, eyes darting to the wings where someone is frantically whispering prompts that aren't quite loud enough to hear but are loud enough to distract everyone in the front rows. Finally, he cobbles together something that's approximately 20% Shakespeare and 80% improvisation. When shall we? The battle. There's blood. It's very dark out here. The audience applauds supportively because we're all in this together now, complicit in the disaster. The witches chant their prophecies while stirring an actual cauldron, a kitchen pot borrowed from someone's home, which is supposedly bubbling, but is clearly just having smoke blown into it from behind by an unseen assistant. The effect would be atmospheric if one witch wasn't actively coughing from the smoke, breaking character to wave it away from her face while continuing to chant. Double, double, cough, toil, and hack, trouble. It's hard to feel the supernatural dread when you're worried someone's developing tuberculosis on stage. Historians confirm that amateur theatrical productions were wildly popular in Victorian Britain, with nearly every village and town having some form of dramatic society. These productions range from competent to catastrophic, but they provided entertainment and social cohesion in communities without access to professional theater. Some scholars debate whether amateur theater democratized culture or just gave mediocre performers an audience. Probably both, honestly, and that's fine. The fight scenes are where things get really interesting. Macbeth and Macduff face off in the final act with wooden swords that look like they were whittled by someone who'd heard swords described but never seen one. The choreography has clearly been practiced, but not enough, and not recently. They swing at each other with the enthusiasm of men who've had 3 rehearsals and conflicting memories of what they're supposed to do. Macduff's sword flies out of his hand, not dramatically, just accidentally, and skitters across the stage into the wings. There's a pause. He retrieves it. They start again from the top of the sequence. Nobody acknowledges this has happened. Then disaster strikes in the form of Lady Macbeth's hair catching fire. She's standing too close to the footlights during her sleepwalking scene, her elaborate updo constructed with pins and what smells like highly flammable hair pomade, and a candle flame makes contact. There's a brief flare, someone gasps. Lady Macbeth, mid-monologue about damn spot, smells burning, reaches up, pats her hair frantically, and extinguishes it while continuing to recite Shakespeare. Out, damned spot, pat, 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 out, I say. She gets a standing ovation for commitment to the craft. The ghost of Banquo is played by the same actor who played Duncan, because the society only has 7 members and most roles require doubling. He enters wearing the same costume but with a white sheet draped over it, trailing behind him, which he immediately steps on, nearly falling face first into Macbeth's lap during the banquet. Scene. Macbeth, to his credit, maintains character while helping Banquo's ghost regain his footing, delivering his lines about horrible shadows while physically supporting the ghost. The atmosphere is thick with candle smoke now, mixing with the smell of singed hair, nervous sweat, and the peculiar aroma of stage makeup made from household ingredients. Your eyes water, your throat tickles. The man in front of you is audibly snoring, his giant hat bobbing with each breath. Nobody wakes him because honestly, that might be the most sensible response to this production. Compare this to modern theater. Professional actors, fire marshals, understudies, multiple rehearsals, sets that don't actively endanger performers. We've professionalized everything, removed the charming chaos of pure amateur enthusiasm. These village performers aren't good, but they're trying so desperately hard that you can't help rooting for them to just make it through without actual injury. The final scene arrives. Macbeth dies, falling dramatically but landing partly on a loose floorboard that pops up and hits him in the back of the head, adding an unscripted moment of comedy to his tragic end. The curtain closes, gets stuck again, same spot as before, and finally lurches shut. The applause is genuine and prolonged. Not because the performance was good, but because we all survived it together. You file out into the night, ears still ringing with mangled iambic pentameter, grateful that at least nobody died for real, though Lady Macbeth's hairline may never recover. The seance takes place in Mrs. Blackwood's parlor, which has been prepared for communion with the dead by drawing all the curtains, extinguishing most of the lights, and arranging chairs around a circular table that wobbles ominously whenever anyone puts weight on it. You're here because your wife insisted, because Mrs. Blackwood claims to channel spirits, and because Victorian society has collectively decided that talking to dead people is both scientifically valid and socially acceptable entertainment. This is what happens when spiritualism meets parlor culture, meets people with too much free time, and not enough understanding of basic physics. The room smells like incense. Cheap incense, the kind that doesn't so much create atmosphere as assault your sinuses. Heavy velvet drapes block every window, creating darkness so complete you can't see your hand in front of your face until your eyes adjust. A single candle flickers on the mantelpiece, casting shadows that dance and writhe like living things, which is exactly the effect Mrs. Blackwood wants. The other attendees are settling into their chairs. Mr. Patterson, who lost his wife last year and desperately wants to believe she's still somehow accessible. Miss Cooper, who just enjoys the drama. And your wife, who's brought you here despite your vocal skepticism. Mrs. Blackwood enters wearing flowing black robes that seem excessive even by Victorian mourning standards. She's a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an air of theatrical solemnity, someone who's discovered that grief is profitable if you package it correctly. She instructs everyone to join hands around the table, completing the circle, creating what she calls a conduit for spiritual energy, and what you recognize as a basic magician's technique for controlling the audience. Your left hand grips Mr. Patterson's clammy palm. Your right holds your wife's, and you're already uncomfortable in ways that have nothing to do with spirits. The seance begins with Mrs. Blackwood calling out to the spirit world in a voice that's 2 octaves lower than her normal speaking voice, probably because ghosts are apparently hard of hearing and respond better to dramatic contralto. She's asking if anyone is present, if any spirits wish to communicate, using the kind of vague language that could apply to literally anything. The room is silent except for breathing and the occasional creak of floorboards settling, which in this context sounds ominous but is actually just wood expanding and contracting with temperature changes. Then the table moves, just slightly. A small rock, but definitely moves. Mr. Patterson gasps. Miss Cooper squeaks. Your wife's hand tightens on yours. You're trying to work out the mechanics. Mrs. Blackwood's probably pushing it with her knees, a classic technique, or maybe the floor is uneven and someone's weight shifted. But in the darkness, with the candlelight flickering and everyone's expectations primed for supernatural occurrences, that small movement feels significant, pregnant with otherworldly possibility. Historians document that spiritualism exploded in popularity during the Victorian era, partly driven by grief from high mortality rates and partly by genuine interest in what was considered scientific investigation of the afterlife. The Society for Psychical Research, founded in 1882, included serious academics attempting to study paranormal phenomena. Some scholars debate whether spiritualism empowered women by giving them authority as mediums or exploited grieving people for profit. Again, probably both. The Victorian era specialized in complex moral ambiguity. Mrs. Blackwood announces that she's making contact. Her voice changes, becomes higher, childlike. She's channeling a spirit guide named Little Mary who will help communicate with the departed. This is spectacularly convenient. Having an intermediary who can relay messages and also serve as an excuse when prophecies don't come true. Little Mary apparently died at age 7 in 1750 something, which raises questions about why a child ghost would spend eternity helping middle-class Victorians chat with their dead relatives. But nobody's asking these questions out loud. The table begins to rock more violently. Someone's definitely pushing it now, creating motion that makes the whole circle sway. In the darkness, you can't see who, can't prove anything, can only feel the movement and wonder if you're the only skeptic in the room or if everyone else is also pretending for social reasons. Little Mary, speaking through Mrs. Blackwood, asks if anyone has a message for someone on the other side. Mr. Patterson immediately responds. He wants to speak with his wife. Elizabeth needs to know if she's at peace. Mrs. Blackwood's face goes slack, her eyes rolling back in a performance that would get laughed off a music hall stage, but here, in darkness and desperation, reads as genuine possession. When she speaks again, it's supposedly Elizabeth. The voice is different, softer, with an accent that might be authentic or might be Mrs. Blackwood's guess at what a working class woman from Yorkshire sounded like. She tells Mr. Patterson she's happy, she's not in pain anymore, he should live his life fully. Generic enough to apply to anyone, specific enough to sound personal. Mr. Patterson is crying now, tears running down his face, squeezing your hand with desperate intensity. You feel something brush your ankle. In the darkness, it could be anything, a draft, someone's foot shifting, a cat that snuck in, but Miss Cooper shrieks that something touched her, and suddenly the room is electric with fear and excitement. Mrs. Blackwood announces that the spirits are growing stronger. The veil between worlds is thinning. Everyone must maintain the circle no matter what happens. Your hand is going numb from Mr. Patterson's grip, but you can't let go without breaking the sanctity of the moment. A knocking sound echoes through the room, 3 sharp raps that seem to come from inside the walls. It's probably pipes, thermal expansion, perfectly normal building sounds, but context is everything, and right now, context is screaming supernatural manifestation. Mrs. Blackwood interprets the knocks. 1 for yes, 2 for no, 3 for uncertain. She begins asking yes or no questions, and the knocking responds with suspicious accuracy, like someone's hidden behind the wall with instructions. Compare this to modern paranormal investigation, electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, audio recording equipment, all the technological attempts to bring scientific methodology to supernatural claims. We're still doing seances, just with more gear and streaming it on YouTube. The fundamental human desire to believe there's something beyond death hasn't changed. We've just updated the presentation. The seance concludes with Mrs. Blackwood returning from her trance state looking exhausted, dabbing her forehead with a handkerchief. Everyone's instructed to break the circle slowly to allow the spirits to depart gently. The lights come up, while another candle is lit, which in Victorian terms counts as lights up, and you see everyone's faces. Mr. Patterson looks transformed, peaceful for the first time since you've known him. Your wife is thoughtful, processing. Miss Cooper is already planning how she'll describe this at tomorrow's tea party. You file out into the hallway, back to a world of gas lamps and rationality, but you notice Mr. Patterson's step is lighter. His burden somehow eased by what was probably theatrical manipulation, but felt like genuine connection. Maybe that's enough. Maybe sometimes the comfort matters more than the truth. Though Mrs. Blackwood's request for payment, 5 shillings per attendee, does somewhat undercut the spiritual purity of the experience. The picnic is an exercise in transporting an entire dining room into a field, which seems like a reasonable idea until you're actually doing it. You're carrying a wicker basket that weighs approximately 40 pounds, packed with porcelain plates, crystal glasses, silver cutlery, linen napkins, and enough food to feed a small regiment. Because eating outdoors apparently requires 3 times the equipment and 5 times the effort of eating indoors, but with added insects and unpredictable weather. Your wife walks ahead with another basket containing the actual food, while you follow with the infrastructure of civilization, trying not to trip over tree roots. The chosen spot is a meadow about half a mile from where you left the carriage, because naturally the ideal picnic location must be inaccessible by any convenient means. You're sweating through your wool suit. Yes, full suit, because casualness has limits even when sitting in grass and questioning every decision that led to this moment. Your wife, wearing a dress with approximately 17 layers of fabric and a corset that makes breathing an adventure, somehow looks less miserable than you feel, which is both impressive and slightly irritating. Setting up the picnic requires engineering skills nobody mentioned. The blanket, a heavy wool thing that's supposed to protect you from damp ground, but mostly just creates a slightly less uncomfortable, damp surface, keeps blowing away in the breeze. You weight down the corners with rocks, which works until your wife points out that rocks on a picnic blanket aren't aesthetically pleasing. You remove the rocks. The blanket immediately tries to escape. You chase it across the meadow while maintaining as much dignity as a grown man pursuing textiles can muster. Finally, everything is arranged. The plates are distributed, the glasses filled with lemonade that was cold when you left home 2 hours ago but is now tepid and slightly separated. The sandwiches emerge. From their wrappings, cucumber and butter, egg and cress, thin slices arranged on bread that's already going stale in the outdoor air. There are cold chicken legs, hard-boiled eggs, cheese that's sweating in the sun, and a Victoria sponge cake that has somehow survived transport intact, which feels like a minor miracle. Then the wasps arrive. Not one wasp, not a casual wasp passing through. A squadron of wasps who've apparently been alerted to the presence of sugar and protein in their territory and have come to claim their share. They circle the cake with military precision. One lands on your chicken leg, another investigates your lemonade, your wife swats at them with a napkin, which only seems to anger them, turning reconnaissance into an attack. You're trying to eat while also monitoring multiple aerial threats, tracking their flight patterns, defending your sandwich from creatures whose entire evolutionary purpose is ruining outdoor dining. Historians confirm that picnics became fashionable among Victorian middle classes as part of the Romantic movement's idealization of nature. Escaping urban pollution and crowding for rural settings was seen as healthful and morally improving. Some scholars debate whether this represented genuine appreciation of nature or just performance of leisure class status. Hauling fine china into fields was conspicuous consumption, masquerading as simplicity. The answer probably depends on whether you're the person carrying the baskets or the person being served. The ground is not comfortable. This is obvious in retrospect, but somehow surprising in practice. The blanket provides minimal cushioning between you and roots, rocks, and uneven terrain that seemed perfectly flat from a standing position but reveals itself as a topographical nightmare once you're sitting. You shift, trying to find a position that doesn't create immediate numbness in your legs or pressure on your tailbone. No such position exists. You accept discomfort as the price of outdoor leisure. A cow appears at the far end of the meadow, watching you with bovine suspicion. It begins walking in your direction. You're not sure of the protocol here. Do you defend your picnic from livestock? Do you retreat? How aggressive are cows exactly? The creature continues its slow approach, apparently curious about these humans invading its grazing territory. Your wife suggests packing up. You're halfway through your chicken leg and stubborn enough to finish it despite the approaching threat. The cow gets within 20 feet, loses interest, and wanders away. You claim victory over nature while secretly relieved you didn't have to test your cow fighting abilities. The cake is now under siege by ants, an entire column of them materializing from nowhere, forming a supply line from the ground to the cake plate with impressive organizational efficiency. You've been sitting here 20 minutes and already your picnic spot has been claimed by the local insect empire. Your wife carefully relocates the cake, but the ants simply adjust their route. You're engaged in a territorial war with creatures whose civilization is arguably more efficient than your own. Compare this to modern picnics: plastic containers, disposable plates, insulated coolers, picnic tables with actual benches, ant repellent blankets, bug spray strong enough to create a perimeter. We've acknowledged that eating outdoors is inherently problematic and engineered solutions, but Victorians insisted on bringing their indoor standards outside, refused to compromise on china and crystal, suffered beautifully for the aesthetic of rustic leisure. A sudden gust of wind sweeps across the meadow. Your napkin takes flight, tumbling end over end toward the tree line. You're up and running again, chasing linens like it's your full-time occupation, leaving your wife to defend the remaining items from opportunistic wasps who sense your absence. You retrieve the napkin, return to find she's packed everything away, declaring the picnic concluded due to hostile conditions and her complete exhaustion from doing nothing but sitting in grass for 30 minutes. The walk back to the carriage is longer than you remember. Uphill both ways somehow, carrying baskets that have mysteriously gained weight despite being emptier. You're covered in grass stains, wasp-wary, and nursing bruises from sitting on concealed rocks. Your wife's dress has acquired mud around the hem from when the ground proved softer than anticipated. You'll both agree later that it was a lovely afternoon. Very refreshing, should do it again soon. And you'll both be lying, already dreading the next social obligation that requires hauling fine china into hostile territory, occupied by insects with no respect for property rights. The lawn tennis party is happening in the Ashworth's back garden, which has been converted into what optimistically passes for a tennis court. Mostly flat grass with boundaries marked by strips of white fabric pinned to the ground with croquet hoops. You're here in full afternoon dress, which means layers upon layers of fabric designed to maximize discomfort during physical activity, because the Victorians genuinely believed that exercise should never compromise one's appearance or social propriety, even if it compromises your ability to breathe or move effectively. The women have it spectacularly worse. Your wife is wearing a dress with a high collar, long sleeves, a fitted bodice with approximately 30 buttons up the back, and a skirt that reaches the ground, creating a fabric obstacle course for her own feet. Underneath is a corset pulling her waist into a shape that internal organs were never meant to accommodate, petticoats adding volume and weight, stockings and shoes with heels that sink into the soft lawn with every step. She's supposed to run, swing a racket, and maintain ladylike composure while essentially wearing a portable prison. The fact that women accomplished any athletic movement in these conditions speaks to either remarkable determination or complete insanity. The tennis rackets are wooden, heavy, poorly balanced things with catgut strings that go out of tune if you look at them wrong. They're strung at tensions that would make modern players weep, creating a tiny sweet spot in a large area of the ball goes absolutely nowhere near where you aimed. You're paired with your wife against the Ashworths, and the game begins with all the competitive intensity and coordination of four people who've never played tennis, attempting to play tennis while dressed for a funeral. The serve is a disaster. Mr. Ashworth tosses the ball up, swings his racket, makes contact with something, possibly the ball, possibly air, possibly a passing, a butterfly, and sends whatever he hit sailing over the fence into the neighbor's garden. A servant is dispatched to retrieve it. This happens approximately every third serve. The neighbors have learned to expect a steady rain of tennis balls throughout summer weekends and have given up trying to garden near the fence. Your wife attempts to return a serve, swings the racket, and her skirt wraps around her legs mid-motion, nearly tripping her. She catches herself, laughs it off, but you can see the frustration in her eyes, trying to perform athleticism while your clothing actively conspires against movement. Mrs. Ashworth suffers a similar fate moments later, her dress tangling as she moves backward, causing her to sit down hard on the grass in a manner that's probably bruised both her tailbone and her dignity. She rises with tremendous grace considering the circumstances, adjusting her hat, which has tilted at an angle that suggests either rakish style or structural failure. Historians document that lawn tennis emerged in the 1870s as a fashionable outdoor activity for the middle and upper classes. The All England Croquet and Lawn Tennis Club held its first championship at Wimbledon in 1877, though women weren't allowed to compete in serious matches until much later because female athleticism was considered medically dangerous. Some scholars debate whether early tennis was genuine sport or elaborate social theater. The evidence suggests it was both, a competitive game forced through the filter of Victorian propriety. The scoring system is incomprehensible. Someone's explained it to you twice, involving terms like 15, 30, 40, and deuce that have no logical connection to the numbers they represent. You're keeping score in your head until you lose track completely and just start agreeing with whatever the Ashworths claim. They could announce the score as purple to elephant and you'd nod along because the heat and the exertion and the tight collar cutting off blood flow to your brain have made you suggestible. Your suit is not designed for movement. Every swing pulls at the shoulders, threatens to split the seams, restricts your range of motion to approximately 60% of what would be useful. Sweat is soaking through the layers, shirt, vest, jacket, creating dark patches that are visible and mortifying because visible sweat suggests loss of control, loss of composure, loss of everything Victorian society holds dear. You're overheating, genuinely overheating, in danger of actual heat exhaustion. But removing your jacket would be scandalous, so you just suffer. A point goes on for 17 shots, mostly because nobody can aim well enough to end it. The ball bounces back and forth, players lunging and swinging, missing more often than connecting, creating a rally that's less athletic competition and more slapstick comedy. Your wife makes contact, sends the ball sailing toward misses. Ashworth, who swings her racket in a motion that looks more like swatting at an aggressive pigeon than playing tennis. She connects. The ball flies back. You swing, miss completely, and your momentum carries you forward in a stumbling run that ends with you stepping on your wife's dress hem, nearly pulling her over backward. The game concludes not because anyone reached the required number of points, you've all lost count and abandoned pretense, but because Mrs. Ashworth declares she needs to sit in the shade or risk fainting. Nobody argues. You all retreat to the garden furniture arranged near the house, collapsing into chairs with the weariness of marathon runners, despite having played approximately 20 minutes of the worst tennis in recorded history. Servants bring lemonade and cucumber sandwiches. You've never been more grateful for cucumber in your life. Compare this to modern tennis, breathable fabrics, engineered shoes, rackets made from space-age materials, actual rules. Enforcement, water breaks when needed. We've acknowledged that athletics and formal wear are incompatible, that competition requires appropriate equipment, that comfort enhances rather than diminishes the experience. But Victorians played tennis like they did everything else, overdressed, overheated, and utterly committed to maintaining appearances even while actively dying from the effort. Your wife's face is flushed, her hair escaping its pins, her dress grass stained and slightly torn at the hem. She looks miserable and beautiful and completely exhausted. The Ashworths are in similar condition, disheveled, overheated, probably mildly dehydrated. Everyone agrees it was a wonderful afternoon, very vigorous, excellent exercise. Everyone is lying. You're all just relieved to be sitting down and not actively being strangled by your own clothing while chasing a ball across uneven ground. The garden party is the final evolution of Victorian outdoor torture, combining all the worst elements of previous activities. The social warfare of the charity bazaar, the uncomfortable clothing of lawn tennis, the insects of the picnic, and adding peacocks. You're at the Worthington estate, which features actual landscape gardens with gravel paths, topiary bushes shaped into forms that might be animals or might be abstract concepts, and Lady Worthington's pride and joy, a collection of ornamental peacocks that roam the grounds like beautiful, territorial nightmares with vendettas against human happiness. The dress code is garden party, which translates to formal wear that will be ruined by grass and dirt, but you'll pretend not to notice. You're in your second best suit because you learned from the tennis disaster, though second best still means wool, still means too many layers, still means sweating through everything while maintaining the fiction that gentlemen don't perspire. They merely glow with healthful exertion. Your wife is in a pastel dress that cost more than your monthly wages, already worried about grass stains she hasn't acquired yet but knows are inevitable. The garden tour begins with Lady Worthington pointing out her roses, dozens of varieties, each one apparently different from the others in ways you're supposed to notice and comment upon. "This is a Duchess of Albany," she announces, gesturing at a pink bloom that looks exactly like the previous 6 pink blooms. "Very rare, temperamental, requires specific soil conditions." You nod appreciatively, say something about the petals, move on to the next rose, which is also pink and also allegedly special. You've been walking for 5 minutes and you're still in the rose section. The garden is enormous. This will take hours. A peacock screams. Not calls, not cries. Screams. A sound like someone being murdered, but more theatrical. You jump despite yourself. The bird is perched on a garden wall about 20 feet away, its tail feathers spread in full display. Iridescent blues and greens catching the sunlight. Absolutely stunning and absolutely aggressive. Lady Worthington smiles indulgently. "That's Emperor," she says. "He's very protective of his territory." This is Victorian upper-class code for "that bird attacks people regularly, but we pretend it's charming." The refreshment table is set up near the fountain. Finger sandwiches cut into triangles because apparently rectangles are too working class. Tiny cakes that require 3 bites each and create crumb disasters. Tea served in china so delicate you're afraid breathing on it wrong will cause fractures. You're balancing a plate, a teacup, and a napkin while trying to eat standing up because all the chairs are occupied by elderly relatives who claim them immediately upon arrival and show no signs of moving until the party concludes, or they expire, whichever comes first. Emperor the peacock is stalking you. You've noticed this gradually over the past 10 minutes. Every time you move to a new location, the bird repositions itself, maintaining roughly the same distance, its beady eyes fixed on you with what you can only describe as malicious intent. You mention this to your wife. She suggests you're being paranoid. Then Emperor charges, running at you with surprising speed for a creature covered in elaborate plumage, and you're suddenly backing away while holding your teacup at arm's length, trying not to spill while also not being attacked by ornamental poultry. Historians confirm that garden parties were essential social events for Victorian upper classes, opportunities for display of wealth, horticultural achievement, and social connections. The gardens themselves were status symbols. Elaborate landscaping required staff, maintenance, and expertise. Some scholars debate whether these events represented genuine appreciation of nature or just another arena for competitive, conspicuous consumption. Given that people imported exotic birds specifically to intimidate their guests, the answer seems fairly clear. You've retreated to the topiary section. hoping Emperor won't follow. The bushes here are sculpted into shapes that are supposed to be elephants, dolphins, and classical figures, but mostly look like green blobs that someone started carving and then gave up halfway through. Mrs. Henderson, from the charity bazaar still holding grudges, is explaining her own garden's superior topiary to anyone who'll listen, while Lady Worthington pretends not to hear, but her smile gets tighter with each comparison. Inside the conservatory, you discover the taxidermy collection. Because apparently having live aggressive birds wasn't enough, Lady Worthington also collects dead animals arranged in disturbing tableaux. There's a family of squirrels having a tea party, frozen in positions that suggest either whimsy or a crime scene, depending on your perspective. A group of rats is arranged playing cards, their little paws positioned around actual miniature playing cards, their glass eyes reflecting the greenhouse light with unsettling realism. Someone has put tremendous effort into making dead rodents look like they're enjoying leisure activities, and you're forced to look at this and say something complimentary because that's what garden parties require. The exotic plant section features specimens from across the empire, ferns from India, flowers from Africa, vines from South America, all maintained in conditions that approximate their natural habitats, which means the conservatory is humid, hot, and smells like decomposing vegetation. You're already sweating in your wool suit. Now you're in what's essentially a Victorian sauna. Admiring plants while moisture condenses on every surface, including your forehead. Lady Worthington explains the Latin names, the collection difficulties, the special care requirements. You try to breathe shallowly and not pass out. Emperor has found you again. The peacock is inside the conservatory now, having followed you through the door like a beautiful feathered stalker. It's between you and the exit, tail feathers spread, making that horrible screaming sound that echoes off the glass walls and probably frightens the exotic plants. Other guests have noticed, are watching with the kind of interest people show when they're glad something's happening to someone else. You're trapped in a greenhouse with an aggressive bird and a collection of dead squirrels at a tea party. This is Victorian leisure at its finest. Lady Worthington finally calls Emperor off. Apparently, she can control him when she chooses to. She just finds it entertaining to watch him terrorize guests first. The bird struts away with wounded dignity as if you were the problem. You escape the conservatory, return to the garden proper, and immediately encounter the croquet game that's devolved into an argument about whether someone's ball moved or was moved. Accusations of cheating, appeals to rules that nobody can quite remember, all delivered in polite voices that barely conceal genuine anger. Compare this to modern garden parties, casual dress codes, food you can eat without engineering degrees, birds that are safely contained or actually wild rather than weaponized, generally lower stakes for social interaction. We've decided that outdoor gatherings should be pleasant rather than endurance tests. But Victorians packed formal wear, aggressive wildlife, competitive flower arrangements, and reanimated rodent dioramas into an afternoon and called it entertainment, called it culture, called it an absolutely delightful way to spend a Saturday. The party winds down as the sun angles lower, casting long shadows across the meticulously maintained lawns. Your feet ache from standing on gravel. Your suit is rumpled and damp. You've successfully avoided eating anything that would create visible crumbs, drunk enough tea to float a battleship, and survive multiple peacock encounters. Your wife has networked with the appropriate people, admired the appropriate roses, said the appropriate things about the taxidermy despite her obvious horror. You walk back to the carriage past topiaries that look more ominous in twilight, past roses whose perfume has turned cloying in the cooling air, past Emperor who watches from his perch with what you swear is smug satisfaction. Tomorrow, your feet will hurt. Your wife will discover grass stains on her dress that no amount of cleaning will remove. Someone will gossip about Mrs. Henderson's comments about Lady Worthington's inferior topiary. And the social ripples will spread through drawing rooms across the county. But tonight, driving away from the Worthington estate, you're just relieved it's over, that you survived another Victorian social obligation, that you can finally loosen your collar and admit that you're exhausted. The sun sets behind you, painting the sky in pinks and oranges, and you close your eyes, listening to the horse's hooves on the road, feeling the gentle sway of the carriage, letting the day's tension slowly drain away into the approaching darkness. The peacock's scream echoes one final time across the gardens, a fitting farewell to an afternoon of beautiful suffering. You smile despite yourself. Next week, the Ashworths are hosting a card party. That should be quieter, calmer, less prone to avian attacks. You're already dreading it, already planning excuses, already knowing you'll attend anyway because that's what Victorian social obligation demands. Showing up, suffering through, pretending you're having a wonderful time while counting the minutes until you can leave. The world softens at the edges now, afternoon fading into evening, tension releasing like a held breath finally exhaled. The road ahead stretches out, leading home where you can shed these restricting clothes, this social armor, and just exist for a few hours before tomorrow demands you do it all again. The horse's rhythm becomes hypnotic, steady and unchanging, pulling you forward through gathering dusk toward rest and the promise of sleep, where at least there are no peacocks, no social warfare disguised as entertainment, no requirements beyond simply being still, being quiet, letting go of the day's elaborate performance and sinking into blessed, peaceful darkness, where nothing is expected and everything is forgiven and all the world's demands fade into silence.